Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight, my guest is Darcy Weir. Before I bring him on, I want to remind you to subscribe to Forbidden Knowledge News on Odyssey. We're always available on all popular podcast platforms, and definitely check us out on Rokfin, where you can get all our juicy premium content. You can also get all of our regular shows, but you can also get all of the premium content from all the amazing content creators on Rokfin. I also want to tell you how you can keep your private data to yourself with next-generation security. NordVPN protects your internet traffic with cutting-edge security technologies, ensuring strong and reliable encryption between your device and a VPN server. You can also browse without a trace. NordVPN is based away from the EU and US jurisdictions and has no obligation to collect your personal information. That means they don't record, monitor, store, log, or share anything you do. Just click the link in the description and you can get up to 70% off a 1 or 2 year plan. Tonight I want to welcome Darcy Weir. He is an independent documentary filmmaker from Canada, trained as a video editor, writer, director, and producer in university and technical college. He has chosen to work on some of the most fascinating subjects that are discussed today, and he will also be a presenter at the upcoming Laughlin UFO Mega Conference. Darcy, welcome. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yes, it's always great having you. I'm actually looking forward to meeting you at this year's upcoming Laughlin UFO Conference. You're going to have not only a presentation, but premiering 3 new films, so that's going to be awesome. Tonight, I figure we can just talk about some of your previous films and get your thoughts on the range of phenomenon that we've discussed before, such as UFOs, abductions, and hell, even a little bit of Bigfoot, because
Sure.
Something has been pushing me to look more into Bigfoot lately. I don't know if it's the fact that I moved to Colorado, to the Rockies, and I've had a few more guests that kind of look into the Bigfoot phenomenon lately. Because I remember when I first started this, I'd never done any shows on Bigfoot until probably last year or the year before, because it just wasn't one of those things that I really was intrigued by until I started hearing, some of the stranger things about Bigfoot, like, how it could be interdimensional and disappears, and some of the more anomalous things like that, and, the revisit of the Patterson-Gimlin footage, which is pretty compelling. Let's start there. What do you think about that particular footage right there?
I think the Patterson-Gimlin footage seems to exhibit a living, breathing, flesh and blood animal, not a human. And I think if you see it in its finest quality, which you can in one of my documentaries, The Unwanted Sasquatch, we slow it down, we go frame by frame, and you see anatomy. You see signs of muscle and skin moving. Patty, who is the featured creature in this film, the famous Patterson-Gimlin film, seems to have large, voluptuous breasts covered in fur. And very, very powerful looking creature. Walking, you can see the toes furl up as it takes steps, and its walking gait seems to be a little bit different from a human stride. We interview Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum for that film, and I think I've been on another podcast with you, on the
Union of the Unwanted. Yeah.
Union of the Unwanted, and we talked about that. Dr. Meldrum was on that, and he's such an interesting public figure that discusses the Sasquatch or Bigfoot phenomenon, because he's a mainstream academic by all accounts. He's a anthropologist and wildlife. He studied the locomotion of chimpanzees and stuff when he was coming up and getting his PhD. So he knows what a human walks like and what a primate walks like or moves when it crosses terrain. And I find his explanations for why what we see in the Patterson-Gimlin film and what was left at the scene of the crime so to speak, the footprints that had been casted, plaster casted, and many other footprints that have been plaster casted throughout history regarding the subject seem to show signs of a working foot. There are hoaxers, don't get me wrong, in every phenomenon out there, even the UFO phenomenon, there are hoaxers. There are people that come to it interested in drumming up their own story and stealing attention away from credible, more realistic events that have happened in history. And, hoaxers that create stompers. Stompers are basically, fake feet you can either slide your foot into, or you can attach poles to, and you can walk and create your own paths with, create your own tracks. And it seems like a stomper is not an articulated foot. So when you see the paths that are made or the tracks that are left for a certain amount of distance with a stomper, it's quite evident that every single track is identical. It doesn't look unique, each track, and it doesn't seem to show anatomy at play. And Dr. Meldrum has been pretty good, and many other researchers that have looked at the Patterson-Gimlin film demonstrate that you see an animal that's walking a certain way and evading these two men that were on horseback. And then the tracks show muscle and bone compacting sand, and each track is a little bit different, and it shows what's called a mid-tarsal break. And I think that's kind of the smoking gun when it comes to the tracks.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Now, what are your thoughts about the aspect of them just kind of disappearing into nowhere? I've heard, people who have been right, near them, kind of tracking them, and they seem to have just gone into nowhere. The footprints disappear into nowhere. Do you think it's just that they have a clever way of just knowing how to blend in and disappear because they've been in the wild for all this time? Or do you think there could be some supernatural aspect to that?
I think there's something to what you just said in terms of them knowing their environment so well. You could say that they've mastered that ability to escape detection or to escape your view. Many animals have survival instincts, which have to do with hiding. You look at all kinds of birds and stuff. As soon as they see you, they can hide behind branches. And if a primate that's been unacknowledged by mainstream science is out there and it's relatively intelligent, I'm sure it can hide pretty well from you. I haven't heard enough in terms of research that demonstrates these portal jumping interdimensional Sasquatch. I'm more of a flesh and blood Sasquatch believer. Not that I think when you talk portals and such, you have to go back to science and to create something that would allow you to jump through time or space in some kind of portal would require energy. Not energy in the pseudoscience description of it. Let's say electrical force. And so far, there's no mainstream laboratory that has been able to teleport human beings or materials that we know of in a large scale. So why is it that we're able to jump that leap in logic so easily and believe that Sasquatch, a flesh and blood creature that, you know, we see footprints for, and we see hair samples and all kinds of other behavior that has been demonstrated throughout history by many different cultures, including ours, somehow has figured out how to time travel, teleport, you know, without any device or technology to aid him. We're talking at this point, if we believe that Sasquatch has that type of capability, we're talking about a Sasquatch ghost. And I don't believe in Sasquatch ghosts. I believe in creatures. I believe in aliens. I believe in, humanity. I don't believe in alien ghosts. I don't believe in Sasquatch ghosts. And I believe people that are spending too much time looking into Sasquatch ghosts need to find something else to do.
Man, Sasquatch ghost, you just gave me a great idea for a new film. I'm going to make a movie about the Sasquatch ghost. Make $1 million.
Cool. All right, man. That would be a good paranormal fiction. Maybe
a great horror movie.
Call up the Blumhouse boys and they can help you out with producing that.
Right. Yeah, that's funny. Well, why do you think that there are never any bones or bodies discovered of these creatures? Do you think that they're taking their own and burying them or getting rid of these somehow?
That question's been asked before, and I think there could be possibilities that we've collected bones for some of these creatures in the past and misidentified them. They could be locked away in museums for all we know and categorized as something else. Look, there's been a long history of sightings, and people say, well, how come we've never captured a Bigfoot or Sasquatch? Well, there actually is an example of a capture back in the 1800s, the Jacko capture in Yale, British Columbia. And, I think in my logic leads me to think that for some reason, these are not to be an acknowledged living creature. People would prefer, or maybe the mainstream scientific community would prefer our money and time be spent on other things than proving that there's this upright ape running around North America and possibly other parts of the world. It might have to do with a environmental sort of conspiracy. To speak of something that's actually out there in reality, we have many reports that have come out of Tasmania in Australia. Tasmania is this southern island off the coast of the state of Victoria in Australia. And Tasmania is home to very different flora and fauna. You know, you've got the Tasmanian devil, you've got different types of marsupials, and many people have mentioned and taken pictures of and video throughout history of what they describe as being the Tasmanian tiger, the thylacine. And we know that this did exist. Back in the 1950s was the last film that we had. It's an old black and white film. You can see it yawn and its jaw like extends very wide and such. It looks kind of like something between a mix of a dog and like a kangaroo or something. It's
very strange.
It's a quadruped. It's got some distinct sort of black stripes on its back and a unique jaw. And this at one point lived throughout Australia, and then its population got isolated to Tasmania, which is that island. And the last one that we believe to ever existed is the one that is featured in that 1950s film, the black and white footage, and it's taken at a zoo in Tasmania. Now, the conspiracy here is that many people are still seeing these things on the island of Tasmania. And the island of Tasmania's economy is mainly run by pulp and paper mills and lumber. They supply most of their lumber and paper to the rest of Australia. So if you declare that this creature still exists and it's super highly endangered in the forests of Tasmania, you might have to shut down this industry. And many people that speak out about its existence are linked back to lumber, pulp, paper, and government in Tasmania. And many people that say they have seen it are more for the environment. You know, they want to protect this ecosystem, and they kind of want to shut down the industry there, which is, you know, thousands of years old trees, kind of like the beautiful giant red trees in Northern California. Name is escaping me, but
the redwoods, yeah.
Redwoods, right? So, you know, many people are protective of that forest, and there's a lot of protection over the Tasmanian tigers forest area as well, but it's not acknowledged as existing. And full circle, I'm trying to say, if you acknowledge that there's an upright ape that still exists today in North America, and we know very well that there's a very large pulp, paper, and you know, logging for our industry in North America, then it's plausible that that could be why they don't want to acknowledge this thing exists.
Yep, that would make a lot of sense. That's a good theory. Now, have you had many reports or looked into many cases where these things were aggressive with people or even possibly attacked people?
I have not heard of anybody being, you know, like picked up and ripped apart ferociously.
Yeah, right.
But I have heard of signs of aggression. Sort of like I've heard of people that have had their place where they're standing charged. You know, like they can see trees and bushes and stuff, and maybe that was a bear, but a bear can't throw rocks. And I think that's one of the major behaviors that you commonly hear reported when people have Sasquatch sightings or encounters is a small boulder or a large rock being thrown what appears to be underhand in their direction. And this is reported by Dave Corton, who I featured in the Unwanted Sasquatch documentary. Dave Corton was, I think it was 2009. He was going hunting in an area called Ruby Creek, which is just north of Vancouver in British Columbia, Canada. And as he was passing this sort of bog, this pond by a trail in the forest, he saw a rock sailing over this little water area towards him. He turned his gun that way. He had a rifle of some kind. And this boulder, this large rock, just kind of plunked down in front of him in the water and splashed him and freaked him out, right? Because this was pretty large stone that had been coming sailing over this water area, which is also distinctively not that small. So that startled him. And when he looked across this water feature where the forest was, you know, sort of the tree line, from these bushes and stuff that kind of went off in the distance, he saw what looked like an upright, black-haired, ape-like thing running into the tree line. So it wasn't a bear throwing a rock at him, and it really shook him up. He basically turned around and left. He didn't want to hunt anymore. And I think this is a sign of, you're in my territory, get the heck out of here type behavior.
Yeah, that's super interesting too. Well, what do you think is going on with some of the hotspots that also include paranormal activity and Bigfoot sightings? Do you think it's a coincidence, like places like Skinwalker Ranch? They had another one, Blind Frog Ranch, I believe. There's a few places across the United States and across the planet, really, that report not only hotspots with paranormal activity, UFOs, but strangely enough, Bigfoot sightings. What do you think is going on with there? Is it a coincidence or something else?
I don't know. Like, I've heard of the Skinwalker Ranch reports.
Right.
I think it's very plausible that there could be some kind of cryptid that's Sasquatch related sightings seen out in this area. This is a large wilderness area, but in terms of some reports from the NIDS team that were done at the Skinwalker Ranch. I remember the NIDS team described like kind of a portal. Here we go, portal, right? Opening up in the ground on the ranch, and what looked like a large humanoid climbing out of it. And I originally equated that with Sasquatch. But somebody recently corrected me and said, well, no, they said humanoid. They said it was large, black. They could see it through a camera that was shooting in, I think, infrared, some kind of different light spectrum than what the human eye can even see. And it came out and then ran into the woods or the landscape there. I don't know. I don't know enough about. Here's the thing, like when you hear about Sasquatch sightings and then UFOs, I don't believe there's, if UFOs and their occupants are interested in analyzing human life and possibly abducting human life and examining us and such, I don't think there's any reason they wouldn't do the same to other creatures on this planet. So possibly people are having these cryptid sightings, but they're also seeing a UFO at the same time that's also interested in these cryptids.
Now, earlier you mentioned the kind of communication like tree knocks, strange markings in the woods. I've seen videos of like trees bent that no human could possibly do. Do you think that this is ways of these creatures like communicating with each other, or even marking territories, things like that?
Um, I think the structures might be sometimes man-made and a bit of a hoax to draw attention so people can have their own story.
Right.
But I haven't. What I have heard is that there's what seems to be nest sites. In my latest documentary, Sasquatch Among Wildmen, there seemed to be a area in the Olympic National Park that this group that called them the Olympic Project, they stumbled upon because, well, basically they didn't stumble upon this group, this area. It was a logger, like an excavator, had come along to this part of the forest and had seen these structures. They looked like giant woven nests that were just off the ground, constructed of huckleberry bush branches. And huckleberry bushes can stand, up to 13, 14 feet tall. And this area of the forest is just completely covered. It's also a ridgeline area, so there's a river running nearby where salmon also migrates every year, and loads of huckleberry bushes, so lots of food sources, and then this sort of cliff line. And they found these nesting sites along the cliffside, which indicated that whoever was building them, whatever was building them, were interested in having a tactical vantage point, being able to see the landscape all around them. And it's also isolated, and there's also lots of food. So were these humans? Probably not, because these nests looked massive. And many of the sticks were broken off like over 8 feet off the ground. So unless Shaquille O'Neal is out there in the forest, kind of ripping branches off of huckleberry bushes, I don't think you usually go for the lowest, the lowest hanging opportunity to build something like that if it was us. But they also found many footprints. They found hair that was, lacking a medulla, which is pretty common for primates. And Dr. Meldrum actually went out to this nesting site and took samples from the nests and had eDNA studies done. This is a really interesting thing, because in my documentary, we relate this finding that the Olympic Project has found and done an analysis on, and all the Sasquatch reports that have come out of this area. And then right across the ocean in China, the Yeren has been a Wildman creature that's been reported for thousands of years. It's been part of Chinese lore for a long, long time now. In fact, there was a New York Times, you can just Google Yeren, Yeren, New York Times. And there was a New York Times article, a huge write-up on the history of the Yeren in China. In fact, even during the Qing Dynasty warlord sort of era, they caught one, and it was given as a gift to one of the warlords. And this is just something that has been known or written to have existed in the Shenanjia National Rainforest for a long time. Over there have been many encounters in recent history, 80s, 90s, 70s, and we cover some of the interviews that were done by China Southern News recently by some of these people that had sightings of the Yeren and the things that they documented in their experience. This creature, by all accounts, seems to be, very related to what we would call a Sasquatch. It stands 8 to 10 feet tall. It's covered head to toe with dark fur, reddish brown is what they describe it as. It's got extremely large feet, and it leaves footprints that show signs of a mid-tarsal break. A researcher, a hunter, had went into the Shenanjia National Rainforest there and found a nesting site. And he also found hair samples and sent those off to be studied at a laboratory in China. And they linked it to something that was close to man-like, but not a man. So, it's very interesting that, throughout the world, we have history of wild man sightings. And I think Bigfoot or Sasquatch is just another example of a wild man, but it's our North American wild man.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Yeah, I'm hoping that people like yourself keep looking into this Bigfoot subject, because it's becoming more interesting, and I think it's definitely something that needs to be looked at and studied a little bit more, because I think there's something to it. I think that there is something in the wood that exists out there, and we should find out what the hell it is.
I would agree.
Yeah, I want to pivot a little bit to the UFO discussion for the second half of our show. Now, I know you've done documentaries on abductions themselves, people being taken. What do you think about the abduction phenomenon in general, especially lately? It seems that I don't know if it's more people are coming out and talking about it now. I don't know if it's because of the internet and just more access to these stories. And I guess, the mainstream media is talking about UFOs, so I guess it's becoming more easier subject to talk about. Or do you think that there's actually more abductions and contact experiences happening now?
That's a big question to unpack, and I've got an itchy nose. Give me 2 seconds. So, um, there's a long history of experiencers, people that have had eyewitness accounts of UFOs, and sometimes the occupants of these UFOs, which we would describe as extraterrestrials. Some people say that they've hitched a ride on some of these aircraft or some of these spacecraft, let's say. Betty and Barney Hill were the first like mainstream story that blew up across North America. That happened in the 60s. But there's what we would call paleo abduction history, and paleo abduction history are kind of like the ancient astronaut stories. The story of let's say um, Enoch, the Book of Enoch. Enoch was said to have gone aboard a craft. Butchering the story here, but he was taken to the heavens by the angels and taught their ways, and then brought back, and he taught, agriculture and all this stuff to mankind. So, is that real, or is that just a story, sort of evolution of mankind's technology creation story? I don't know. But I would like to think, if there is an interest in our planet and an interest in our biology, an interest in what we're doing throughout history and how we're changing, if at all, and the observers have been coming to our planet for a long time, that they most likely have been abducting us throughout history. And Travis Walton is a really prevalent case. Kathleen Marden is an abductee and somebody who works with experiencers. And I don't know if you've seen Being Taken, but we interviewed both of them. Stanton Friedman did some really good research on the abduction cases. And here's a man who is a nuclear physicist and took interest in UFOs, but this is also a guy that put his skeptical cap on for Bob Lazar and all kinds of other folks in the UFO phenomenon that have come forward and said that they've got information regarding what UFOs are and their work on them and so on and so forth. He's had a very skeptical hat towards certain people that have come out in the public, to the circles that we kind of communicate with. And he was not that skeptical about abductions. He thought that it was real, based on the Betty and Barney Hill case, Travis Walton, and many, many other cases that have happened throughout history, because they all seem to demonstrate a a repeatable observation. And that's what you need in science. You need repeatable traces of evidence that are observable to lead to a conclusion. And the abduction phenomenon seems to provide that. To your question, though, has it been happening more? I don't know. I haven't investigated a lot of the newer cases. I investigated the most prevalent ones that happened in the past, because we've got more documentation for things that have happened in the past. The newer cases, we don't have enough documentation. In my mind, if we had the Air Force investigating some of these cases like they did for the Betty and Barney Hill case, if we had lie detector tests being passed like Travis Walton's case and all of the people that saw him get zapped by this craft before they drove off thinking he was dead, if we had multiple eyewitness testimony, all of these things sort of add up. Stan Romanek, claims to have been abducted, and Stan Romanek's story has been very tainted by the recent allegations of pedophilic nature that may have been found on his computers. Some conspiracy theorists may think, oh, well, that's just a plant to destroy him and to discredit his story of abduction. Well, Travis Walton isn't being accused of being a pedophile, and many other abductees haven't been. So what does that mean about Stan Romanek's case? And in fact, he had many photos of children and had these weird sort of stories of, star children and all this stuff in his. So that could be a little bit of the truth inside of the fantasy.
Right.
I don't know. It's a sad case either way, because I believed it. I bought, the books and stuff, and I read it, and I was very convinced. But it's abductions are incredibly complex in terms of this phenomenon, in terms of the question of extraterrestrial involvement on this planet, and there's a lot of hoaxes out there too, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's really one of the most unfortunate things about this whole community and field is the hoaxes and the people who just want to get out there to get attention and are making stuff up. It just gives everyone else a bad name and puts the tinfoil hat on us, and we can't get credibility, or it looks at seriously because of those unfortunate cases. I want to go back to Betty and Barney Hill for a minute, because that is a very interesting one to me, for the fact that a few nights or the night before, whenever they were watching The Outer Limits, and the aliens that they described fit the same description of the Outer Limits episode that they were watching. Now, it kind of raises a red flag for me there and makes me think, was this, possibly our own government doing experiments on these people? It was...
Or did they make it up?
Or did they make it up? There's those two questions. It was in a time period where interracial couples were probably frowned upon, and, maybe our government was messing with them. Who knows? There could have been a whole wide range of possibilities with that one, but that's a very intriguing case for me. What are your thoughts about that?
Let me just look up something really quickly.
Yeah, sure.
Just to get an answer.
But there's a few cases like that where, people describe the aliens to be something they've seen in a TV show or something they've seen before, which is very interesting to me. It could bring a bunch of possibilities. Some researchers will say screen memories.
All right, so that's an interesting story that you just brought up, but I want to bring up just a fact here about the Betty and Barney Hill case.
Yeah.
So that Outer Limits episode that you mentioned came out in 1963. Barbara Clancy, who wrote a book called Abducted. She wrote in her book that she believes, in false memory syndrome, and people have these like psychosis and disruptive events that possibly happen earlier on in their life, and they manifest these memories, and that's what abduction really is. It's just a bunch of people that make stuff up. And she says that the reason why many of these abductees make up that certain story is because they saw the famous Outer Limits episode that aired in 1963. Betty and Barney Hill were abducted in 1961. So it's impossible that Betty and Barney Hill watched that Outer Limits episode and then made up that story. The Outer Limits episode, though, is more possibly made based off of the Betty and Barney Hill case.
That's
you
interesting.
See what I mean?
Yeah, because it was portrayed that it happened the other way around.
That's right. Barbara Clancy mentions that. But there's also these paleo abduction cases that have happened throughout history, where in the 1800s, H.G. Shaw, an Englishman, said that he and his friend were traveling in the countryside at night, and they were stopped by a UFO. The occupants of the craft got out. This is in the 1800s. H.G. Shaw, you can look this up. And the occupants proceeded to try and take them aboard their craft. This is a abduction event. Did H.G. Shaw see the Outer Limits? Nope. This is just, and I've been communicating with, have you ever heard of Robbie Graham?
The name sounds familiar.
So Robbie Graham wrote a book called Silver Screen Saucers. And this book is all about how Hollywood and mainstream media, television, for example, have fictionalized very interesting events that have happened in terms of the UFO subject throughout history. So definitely check out that book. There's so many examples that he can provide where our mind immediately veers to pop culture media to be the explanation for a story, where the story often occurred before pop culture wrote it into fiction. So let's look at Men in Black. Men in Black, do you think the very first mention of Men in Black happened when Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith starred in
I've been a UFO nut for a while, so I've heard of Men in Black before the Men in Black movie came out myself. Yeah. So yeah.
So did I, right? And when you mention that to maybe a younger millennial or some of these other generations coming up, if you say, "Hey, have you ever heard of Men in Black?" the first thing they'll probably say to you is, "Yeah, that movie's awesome."
Yeah, the movie with Will Smith. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so that's just proof that the subject often gets painted over as fiction because Hollywood and mainstream media, in terms of television or other fiction media, have abducted the story, so to speak. They've taken it over. They've washed it over with their own sanitized comedic version.
Now we could bring that to a conspiratorial kind of head there. Maybe they're doing that on purpose, so we kind of look at it more as fiction. I've heard that before, that the CIA and Hollywood is very tight together, and they work closely together to kind of create culture and feed our psyche to go in a certain direction. I think that could be possible.
Totally. And I don't doubt for a moment that there won't be a main, like, blockbuster Hollywood film that's going to come out in the next 2 years, revolving around the USS Nimitz case. They did it with, they've done it with so many things that have happened in history. Just wait, mark my words. There's going to be somebody playing the character of David Fravor. There's going to be somebody playing, one of the recent destroyer video on the deck. Oh my God, get the camera. And then right. Being abducted. Who knows, right? Like they'll completely turn it into some kind of horror movie, or they'll make it a comedy. And that'll be that. People will only remember those incidents as some Hollywoodized, fictionalized version. So the kids growing up don't realize, hey, there was actually this big event that happened in history where CNN and CBS and Fox News and 60 Minutes started declaring that UFOs are real based on Pentagon released videos.
Yeah,
no,
that's crazy. And I know we talked about it a little bit earlier for our Laughlin interview, but I want to kind of reiterate your thoughts on that. It seems like, after 2017, the New York Times article came out. It was slowly ramping up. We started hearing more and more about it through the mainstream media, and then 2020 and the pandemic hit, and where it's like UFO mania in the mainstream media. The other day we had, like you said, the 60-minute special where they're just, admitting, yeah, we see these things all the time. President Barack Obama just came out. Well, former President Barack Obama just came out and said something about how
he got fingered by a UFO or something.
No, he was just saying that they have documents, plenty of documents showing in the past that they've documented UFOs and that they don't know what they are.
Why didn't he discuss this when he was president?
Right, exactly. Why now all this? That's my question.
It boggles my mind that people are believing that this is going to go towards. I mentioned the different camps. There's a camp out there that thinks this is going to be the age of disclosure, the age of Aquarius. We're going to put on our bell bottoms again and dance onto their aircraft, their UFOs, and then fly off into the stars and go visit their planet and drink some margaritas with them that are made of space fruits.
Right.
That's one camp. That's the love and light camp. Then there's the super paranoid camp that believes, this is a prison planet, and that we're basically just going to have a means to an end here for the disclosure, which the means is probably going to be, we're locking down this planet even more. We now have a new threat that's from the stars, the Space Force, and all these other new agencies that have to do with researching these extraterrestrial threats, are going to be playing a hand in defending the planet. That's one camp. What was the other camp? Jog my memory.
You have the camp that's afraid of the abductions, the love and light. I don't know who else did you mention?
I can't remember, but there's many different theories, and so right. And then there's just people that say they know what's coming.
Oh, the ultimate knowing crowd,
yeah, the ultimate knowing crowd, right? The crowd that believe in pink feathered avian species, and all that kind of stuff,
right?
Those are lies. Anybody who says they know what's coming does not. We will not know until the Pentagon fully, and there are many partners that they're working with to disseminate this information, because To the Stars Academy does not just get handed this footage from Luis Elizondo and his cohorts on a silver platter without the Pentagon to some degree saying this is okay. Somebody there is saying this is what we're going to do. We're going to roll this out, and we're going to use your platform as a vehicle or whatever, right? So that leads me to believe there is some kind of means to the end here. I don't know what it is. Um, I'm just as curious as everybody else, and I'm going to document it as it comes. I'm annoyed by the skeptics out there that are watching these Tic Tac UFO videos and saying, there you go, like there's a balloon or a flock of birds above the ocean, and the Pentagon saying it's aliens or whatever. That camp I'm super annoyed by, because this is the same skeptics that never were allowing themselves to be convinced that some high technology intelligent species has been visiting our planet, or at least sending drones. That is very possible.
Right.
Excuse me. Um, then there's the camp that sees those videos and goes immediately into those are black budget aircraft, which could be possible. This could be kind of like an internal false flag. It could be the military chasing black budget military craft. It could be one of those things. Who knows?
Yeah.
But
Now, go
we
ahead.
will only know as things unfold.
And since you kind of went down that road, kind of the military psyop thing, what do you think the chances are that even the abduction phenomenon could possibly be our military, dressing in alien suits and taking people, or using some sort of hallucinogens? Because I know a lot of abductions take place in dream states, or maybe it is a mix of both. Maybe it's our military doing a little bit, and a little bit is some off-planet interference. Because when you look at the camp that's totally paranoid that we're a prison planet and an experiment, sometimes I can see where they're coming from. When you look at these abductions and, people meeting their hybrid children and, cattle mutilations, all these things that
You mean Stan Romanek?
Yeah, well, and just things that are completely out of our control. These beings seem to have the ability to completely warp the fabric of our existence. So if we're some kind of experiment, that probably may not be too far off. But what do you think could be the possibilities with that?
I think as above, so below.
With the possibility of the military being involved, or even working with these beings.
With the military, I believe there's credible evidence that they've conducted my labs, which are their own debriefing and interrogation abduction strategies. Some credible witnesses that have gone through a extraterrestrial abduction event are then abducted by a military organization wearing stupid suits and maybe drugging them and trying to question them and extract the information of what happened in their actual extraterrestrial abduction. I think that's a plausible story, because how else are you going to get that story? You could maybe send some men in black, but those guys aren't too nice. And then in terms of, are we an experiment? Yeah, I think it's possible we are. I think it's also possible that that they, are interested in our future. There seems to be some compassion that's shown by, spoken of by abductees, credible abductees, that they didn't want to necessarily hurt their captives. They just wanted to study them, kind of like we do. We take animals from the wild, we tag them, we, take a scoop of their DNA, we do all kinds of stuff and track them throughout their lives. So kind of similar to what I said below was, or what I said before was, as above, so below. I think if there are predatory natures on our planet, with our species and other organisms. I'm sure out in space there are predatory natures and curiosities that have to do with traveling the stars, observing other organisms, and maybe even artificial intelligence is doing this. Maybe, what people describe as being an alien is a artificially intelligent creature, like literally some kind of biological construct that's grown rather than that's grown in a lab, or some kind of situation like that, because the people describe some of these beings as being robotic and highly intelligent and capable of doing certain things that blow the minds of their captors. So that might not be evolution you're looking at. That might be technology.
Right. Yeah. I've heard plenty of stories about these gray beings being somewhat like android or robotic like, and having this hive-like mentality. So that's very very plausible. Now we have a few minutes left. I would like to get just a little bit of a micro teaser about your presentation. Specifically, one aspect. It's going to be about secret space UFOs in Laughlin. I noticed that you're going to be speaking to some of the sightings that astronauts have had of UFOs and anomalous things in space, which I find fascinating because I've heard a few stories so far, not only of American astronauts but Russian cosmonauts, just seeing things that they couldn't explain. So I'm really looking forward to hearing that aspect of it.
Yeah. What we're trying to do in this documentary series is go back in history and do a chronology storytelling of the real events that have happened in NASA space history, as well as some of the cosmonaut space history. Don't try and make me pronounce the Russian space program because it's like insanely long. But we do it in the documentary, and we look at the Russian space program and some of their events that have been reported. And we're in right now. I'm on part 2. I'm working on part 2. But in part 1, you're going to see the beginning to getting up there, getting closer to modern times, and it's interesting because I think NASA, when people think NASA is just this civilian space agency, I think that is a cover story. That is a very naive way of looking at what NASA truly is. They definitely, in my opinion, follow the rules that the DoD, the Department of Defense, set for them, because this is an organization that touches space and it's the best and brightest minds on the North American continent that have to do with investigating what's out there in space. And if you were a military organization, wouldn't you want the best and brightest minds to be on your side doing work for you, and possibly having a cover story for everything that's going on that seems anomalous and seems slightly disconcerting in terms of things buzzing around our planet?
Yes, exactly.
So we kind of lay the foundation for that theory in the documentary. We talk about clues that point to the fact that that might be a reality. And Stephen Bassett, you've probably spoken to before, and he always mentions this thing, the truth embargo. He says, "Oh, I don't like to call Roswell crash and the Phoenix Lights and all of these things a cover up. Like I don't like to say that there was a cover up. I like to say that there actually was a truth embargo in place by our agencies that are told to protect this story at all costs, because it might be destabilizing to the world. It might be destabilizing to our economies. It might be destabilizing to our minds, to our religions, yada, 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 right? I think there's some truth to some kind of embargo going on, like a non-disclosure agreement that only those in the know of the extraterrestrial issue, know the full extent of the non-disclosure agreement, but it is heavily controlled and heavily monitored in all research agencies across the planet. And I think the governments, many different governments, would have to collude with the United States to keep this secret possible. That means Russia, that means China, that means the UK. All of them have to follow suit and say, we haven't seen anything, we don't know anything, right? To save face for the American military. And that's what it's about. It's about securing the planet, securing the world, securing us, making sure that we keep moving along together and advancing together in an orderly way, in my opinion.
Yeah, man, we definitely are living in interesting and fascinating times. And like you said, you gotta document this stuff. You gotta keep an eye on everything coming out, because nothing like this has happened before, and it's sure gonna be fun to see where it's going. Even if there's disinformation flowing out of there, I'm keeping an eye on it like a hawk, because it's definitely interesting times we're living in. Darcy, thank you so much for coming by and talking with us again tonight. If people are interested, your website is occultjourneys.com, right?
Yeah. You can check me out there. You can join my Facebook. I'm just Darcy Weir. Instagram.
Awesome.
Connect.
Yes, definitely connect. Darcy, looking forward to seeing you in Laughlin, hearing your presentations and films, seeing all you guys. And like I said, thank you again for coming on, and I'd love to talk to you again in the future. And I'm sure we'll be doing some interviews and stuff in Laughlin.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, until next time, we'll see you guys tomorrow.